We're at about 6:35 and we have so much information to cover and we need to be out of the building by 8. So I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about everything. Thank you all for being here this evening. Okay, how many of you are here for your first time tonight? No way. Yeah, I didn't think so. I thought everyone who's been here before or for many years. So let's go ahead and get right into it. You should have all received an agenda whenever you came in, and on the back of your agenda is a table. These are all of the documents that were in the latest design package that we're going to discuss today, but it's so much. I did not want to go over document after document. So my task was to pull out what I thought you all would care about, or what I think is really pressing and important for you to know about. So I wanted you to have that information though, so I put it on the back of the agenda. First, I have an update related to the cancer assessment, and then we'll get into all the super fun stuff. So all of us, many of us, requested Texas Department of State Health Services to perform an updated study on the community's health. The last study that they did was in 2015, and it only went until 2012. And so it was a snapshot in time, really, of the community's health. And at that time, they looked at 17 types of cancer that many of our community members told us they were battling. We asked them 2 years ago for an updated study, and they denied us. Yep, so we kept asking you all to sign letters and sign petitions, and we made another ask, and they agreed to do the study. Not only did they agree, but they're consulting with me on each of the major steps. So they have just, I just approved, actually, the study area, the study timeline, and the cancer types. They wanted to make sure it's what we were asking for. So this study, though, is going to be an update. It's going to span 2013 to 2021, and it's going to have additional cancer types that are studied. The reason why they're not going all the way back to 1995 is because it would create confusion if they went back over the study that was already done. And so they're starting where that stopped and picking back up, studying those same cancer types and some additional cancer types that we've learned about since then. So as of right now, I hope to have a presentation to give you all on the results within the next 6 months. Things can move slow with the government, so hopefully 6 months is a conservative estimate of time. Does this speaker and setup sound okay to y'all? Okay. Just making sure. All right, so now moving into the San Jacinto River Waste Pit Superfund site. Today we're going to talk about the southern impoundment, which is just here south of Interstate 10, which is running here. We're going to talk about the northern impoundment, and we're going to talk about the sand separation area. So first, a major update and milestone at the southern impoundment is that the remedial action is complete. So all of the equipment that was mobilized for the remediation at that southern impoundment south of I-10 has been demobilized, and the construction portion of this is 100% complete. In the remedial effort, it took less than 2 years. They removed 150,000 tons of contaminated material. That's over 9,000 truckloads of contaminated material. And then they brought in over 13,000 truckloads of clean fill. Keep these numbers in mind when we're talking about the northern waste pit, because that's a lot of truckloads, and there's going to be even more waste. And I know that it's a pretty easy on and easy off from the freeway, but that's still a lot of truck traffic, and it's a lot of emissions in a localized area here and where the waste is going as well. So there was 1.4 million gallons of water that was treated and released, and that's one of the things we all kept pushing on. The parties responsible for the waste pits had said that they can't treat that much water that they're going to encounter and meet the standards required by the state of Texas and the EPA to discharge it back into the river. And we kept pushing, telling EPA, hold firm on those standards. It's meetable, it's just going to cost them a little more. And the EPA did, and so they had to comply. And it's just another, testament of the community continuing to keep this process under their thumb because they successfully treated 1.4 million gallons of water and pumped it back into the river. And just over 104,000 man-hours to remove all of this waste material, put back in clean fill, revegetate the area. One administrative update, they are still working out the institutional controls, so it's not complete in terms of the administrative process, but all of the construction in this action is complete. All right, so now we're going to get into the cleanup of the northern waste pit. Before I do, though, I'm not following my own agenda, I see that I glossed over the turnover at EPA. So starting with the northern waste pit, I'm not sure if many of you are aware that Robert Appelt is the new remedial project manager. Ashley Howard was the project manager, but she has since moved into a different position within the EPA. So Robert is the RPM, or remedial project manager. And at the southern site, we went from Lauren Palos to Laura Hunt. I have found both Laura and Robert to be very responsive, but they are definitely newer to this site, Laura being the absolute newest to this site within the last few months. So I wanted to let you all know of that change, and I think that that alone warrants the EPA coming and talking with the community about some of the updates that are ongoing. All right, so getting back to the northern waste pit. We reviewed the 100% design submitted by the responsible parties to the EPA on in the last couple of months up to July 17th. We have not reviewed all of the data. That's over 75,000 pages. We will start chipping away at it, but what we have reviewed are the 3 deliverable design packages and most of their appendices. The appendices that have over 75,000 pages of data, we haven't cracked into yet. But we have reviewed, well over 1,000 pages of the actual design, the plan, many of the things that you all have been following and do care about. We will submit comments to the EPA, and when you signed in, you should have gotten the agenda and a letter. And if you agree with that letter, at the end of this presentation, I ask that you sign it. Feel free to leave comments, your address, whatever you'd like, and hand it back. We'd be happy to mail it. We do keep your information confidential. We do not provide that in any other way. Yes, Lisa?
I will note that if something does get sent to a federal agency, that may become public in response to requests.
Yes.
But that FIA is not a governmental entity, and so a lot of what we maintain is private. For those who don't know me, I'm one of their board members.
Yes.
Lisa Gossett.
Yes, Lisa is our board president. She's a founding board member. Sarah is here also, and Sarah was our founding board president. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. So if you agree, if you would please sign one, we'll submit those when we submit our comments that are due by August 30th. So where the agency is at with the design is that they're currently reviewing all of the material, and they have hired a third-party contractor and have been working to bring them up to speed so that if they take this process over, they will be ready to put that contractor to work right away. And so the agency had threatened to take over this process from the responsible parties if this 100% design did not meet the criteria laid out by the EPA. Now, with our review of the design, I would say this 100% design is making progress, but it's moving in the right direction, but there's still a considerable amount of things that they're leaving up to the remedial contractor to select. When we have been pushing for less of the may, might type language and more of the must and shall and required type language, so that we know what types of controls are going to be in place before they open up the pit. There's a lot of inconsistencies in the report. It seems to me maybe they had numerous people working on the report. I don't know if there was within the contractor for the responsible parties, GHD, I don't know if there was one main person who read and went through all of it, but as I'm going through it, I'm going back to my first binder and going back through the pages saying, wait, they're contradicting in binder 2 what they said in binder 1. So there's a lot of inconsistencies. I'm confident the EPA is going to pick up on that. And then one thing that really bothers me about this report is that there are points where they disregard the record of decision. And the record of decision is a very important ruling that was made by the EPA that governs the cleanup standards. And I think that there are places, or in my opinion, there are places where rather than doing a point-by-point assessment as laid out by the EPA, they're doing averages. And it's really important to follow these details because you're not going to be exposed on an average across that area or on an average in the river. You're going to be exposed at a point. And our aquatic life is going to be exposed at a point, at an organism they eat or a sediment they consume. So it's really important to make sure that this design follows that record of decision. I'm sure the EPA will pick up on that as well. So overall, I would say we still have a lot of questions. First, I want to start out by telling you some of the notable items that are going to set the groundwork for a bit more of the technical stuff that I'm going to do my best to break down for y'all. I think this was probably the hardest PowerPoint I've ever put together because of just the sheer quantity of technical stuff that we're trying to digest. So they estimate 230,000 cubic yards of waste to be removed over 7 years. Now, when I say they, I'm talking about the responsible parties contractor. This has not been approved by the EPA. It might be. It hasn't, though. We don't know which way it's going to go. So this, as of right now, is the proposed plan to get this stuff out of there. Now, depending on if they need to dewater, like mix in an agent to solidify some of the material, it could be upwards of 20,000 cubic yards more. So it just depends on the situation at hand, but 230 is the estimate. They also are sticking to their seasonal excavation of only excavating waste material from November to April. But if forecasts seem favorable, they might be comfortable going to July. That's what they wrote. So, as you all know, there's the BMP, or the Best Management Practice, which is that cofferdam wall. We're going to talk a lot about that tonight. But it's that double sheet pile wall that's going to outline the entire northern waste pit. It's 30 feet wide, and it's 10 feet tall. And the area inside is 730,000 square feet. And the waste is an average of 12 feet deep, but in some areas, and particularly the northwest corner, it's as deep as just over 28 feet. Two things that I know many of you care very much about. The health and safety plan now includes the Channelview Fire Department. Previously, they were not including the local emergency responders in the previous plans that have come out. That's something that our community members have advocated for. They're the first responders, right? They should know this is going on, they should be in the loop and understand the situation. And the document also states that they will be having a meeting prior to construction starting with all of the local emergency entities. I would say they should probably take it a step further and include Highlands, Baytown, because those are, especially Baytown, those are people who will respond as well. All right, here's the beast. So this is the northern pit. Everything within this black line that has some shade of green is waste material or material above the waste that's going to be removed. So that's the removal area. This here is that double wall cofferdam. Inside of that is going to be gravel and concrete, and it varies based on the subsurface. There are several locations that are different throughout this wall underneath the riverbed. So what is going in, the depth of it, the strength of it varies based on the strata, based on the layers underground. Right here, the northwest corner is the most problematic. So that's going to take both dredging in the dry with an excavator that is sticking the arm down in there into the dry material. But then there's also going to be a portion that's done with dredging where they will flood in some water to dredge because of the risk of hydraulic heat. We're going to talk about that also. So right here, there's going to be a platform. And that's what this different color and shape here is indicating, is a platform. This right here is going to be a road that they build to go up and over that cofferdam and down into the pit. And that's how the vehicles are going to get in and out. And the trucks will be loaded inside of this cofferdam to minimize loss of material. Okay, so some items that you will see also within that area are as a dewatering facility, and then there's different stockpile areas and containment structures that you will also see within that cofferdam. And then there's going to be a decontamination zone as well. And all of that is going to be lined, so they're not just going to be decontaminating and allowing that to go onto the ground or to run off. And there's a very specific design, an engineering design and drawings for the decontamination zone as well. Okay, so walking through the excavation per season. So we have pushed back on the 7-year cleanup timeline. The record decision outlined the timeline as 2.5 years. We all started raising concerns about hurricane season and asking for emergency plans to be in place, best management practices to mitigate any type of issue, surveillance for when storm activity, plans should a hurricane pop into the Gulf. And the responsible parties took that and said, oh, to mitigate community concerns, we're just not going to excavate for half the year. We're only going to excavate for, November to May, or November to April, sorry. And have touted that it's on behalf of the community, when many of you have expressed concerns that, Jackie, we'd rather get it done in 2.5 years than in 7, because the odds of a hurricane is greater over 7 years. The odds of an accident is greater over 7 years. So the agency has, in more recent times, expressed concern as well over the 7-year timeline. So we're not alone in that. So year 1, they're going to construct this outer BMP wall. There are plans in place in this document, though they are very brief, for noise control, vibration control. You are driving sheet piling down into the riverbed where there's pipelines, there's an interstate, so vibration is very important. Noise is very important. Dust as well. is important because you don't want the particles to become airborne, not for our community, but also not for the workers that are right there day in and day out. So year one, building this isolation structure. Year two, they plan to start the first excavation season right here in the northwest corner. When I first saw that, red flags went up for me because on like page one of the, I think it was the second design package, the first time in all these documents I've read was a stop work order. And it said, you know, if they get in there and the situation is more hazardous than originally understood, they reserve the right to cease operations. And I went, oh, great. So they're putting this stop work order in there, and they're going to start in the most problematic area. It made me really nervous. The more engineers I consulted on this and talked about said it might actually make things safer if they start there. So we've got more work to do, right? We still need to talk to the EPA about this. They're not talking about their position to the public yet, so we'll talk about this a little bit more when we address that area in this presentation. So then they'll move into this area, into the more eastern side, down and around, and as you can see, that's year 3, year 4, year 5, year 7 is removing that wall. They're now agreeing to fully removing the wall, not leaving any of it in the river. And then there will be, particularly right here, there will be riprap, there will be, rock and varying degrees of sediment, clean fill brought in to put back there to make sure they keep that bank stable. Also, I will note that those same types of materials are going to be put around the exterior edges of this and the interior edges, with the idea that that outside of this wall is going to get some scour and erosion from tides, floods, surges, upland flooding. And so they're also doing it on the inside though, because that wall can pretty easily be overtoppled.
Yeah. They're only going 10 feet up.
Yeah.
This last little baby hurricane we had was 9 feet up.
Yeah.
And that was no wave action. No, the wave action probably would have topped over that 10-foot wall. So what are they going to do if that thing fills full of water?
Right, so if it rises 6 inches above, it will fill, and I do have this later, it will fill within 1 to 2 hours of overtopping by just 6 inches of the river.
That's going to fill up?
In 1 to 2 hours.
So what do they do with all that water?
So they're going to pump it out, but I have not seen them really lean hard into the types of systems. But I did see in the design documents that they will not have any type of dam, levees, or walls or anything like that. They did look into some sort of lift system, but that it was not, because of the different slopes of the riverbed, it wouldn't have been stable. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
If the water topples over there and they're going to pump it out, where are they going to pump it to? Because if they're pumping it right back into the river, what is the point of the wall?
Yes. So any water that comes into that, I'm going to keep calling it the BMP, right? Anything that comes into that wall, into that coffer dam, they're calling contact water, which means it has to be treated. So they have estimated there's, I do have slides, so remind me, we've been over this when I get there. There's several different scenarios or different types of water that they are estimating the volume that they will have to treat. Over the duration of a 7-year cleanup, they estimate they will have to treat 22 million gallons of contact water alone. So that's flood water in or rainwater down into. So it will be considered contact as in it came in contact potentially with contamination. It has to be treated.
But if we're in a flood situation and it's toppling over the water, is that system going to be in place and working to keep it below a 10-foot level and treat the water at the same time? How are they going to manage the increase, so much water that we have coming into that little area? because there's not going to be a guy out there managing that pump. So what kind of assurance do we have that during a flood that this pumping and treating will continue and that it won't wind up out of the area?
Yeah. No, I mean, I absolutely hear your concerns and understand, especially, I think my house was just without power for 7 or 8 days in Barrow. So, especially in a situation like that, are there generators? Because they talk about in their preparedness plans, removing fuels and removing things that could spill should the area get flooded, removing the vehicles, removing certain things. So that's a really great point. Also, how will it run?
Right.
Yes, Lisa.
I appreciate the concern about the water, and I think it's a very real issue. My biggest concern with the site has been the waste itself eroding downstream. And that for those who've been in this for a long time, we really fought hard to get the wall to be put around so that it could be removed safely. And so I think a lot of our concern is addressed in this type of pollutant tends to stick to the material. Unlike certain types that tend to dissolve more in water. Not that it doesn't at all, but I think we need to raise the questions with EPA. But again, my big concern is that BMP wall such that it can withstand the forces of the water so it won't go downstream.
So I have
It's gonna expose
And I'm not saying don't put the wall there, I'm just
Yeah.
saying it's not sufficient. And the same thing, if water's coming over and they disturb that, without them even disturbing the material, the soil and stuff,
Yeah.
the water itself will disturb it. Well, if it's just floating back over the wall, not being properly handled, then it is going downstream, the sediment.
Right,
all
and
that,
so
carried by the water.
I think the ideal is that any water that makes it inside that containment should be treated before it goes out. But do consider that right now, you've got river water floating over that site almost on a daily basis. So
The turbulence
my
inside there
understanding
will
is
be
that
extreme.
they won't
You get
uncover
water
it all
levels that
at
get
once.
6 or 8 feet above that water, that wall, the turbulence is going to be extreme.
That is a concern.
The velocity of that water going over that wall, and the differential pressure between those two areas is going to cause significant erosion inside there. There's no way to prevent it.
And
Yeah.
just as an
And
example,
that right
some
there
of
where
the,
that's at is where the river's velocity is the highest. I mean, all this water coming from Conroe and God knows where else goes underneath that damn bridge.
Right where it bottlenecks.
and
Yeah.
just an
In turns.
example is Greg's drone videos of after we've had a flood, the amount of scouring and damage that's done through there. So, I mean, we know that it cuts new paths.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that, I think all of this lends to a shorter timeline. But, over 7 years, that gives them the time to cover back up, and leave, the water treatment operations ongoing and the management of if they need to move all the things if a storm's coming. But you're rolling the dice and rolling it on a longer timeline than a 2.5 or 3 year timeline. I mean, the Southern Waste Pit, they got done in less, granted, simpler remediation, but they were able to excavate and remove 150,000 cubic yards of waste in less than 2 years. This is 230,000. Yeah, year one, and some of the things are going to be much more complex, clearly. But right now, this design, this planning, this is what is so critical to set that up for success. And make sure, having all of the measures in place. But if you want the design documents, I'll send you the links because they've got all kinds of engineering drawings. And there's a lot of that taken into consideration. But we're going to talk a little bit about wave action later. I need y'all's input on that. So let's move into right now, because we'll definitely get back to all of this, the water management. Yes, Anna?
I just want to ask one
Yeah.
question about, 10 feet They expect it to be topped pretty quick and with 6 inches over. So when an event is likely to occur, are they going to cover and take care of what they've been working on as best they can? Besides removing fuels and equipment and such, are they going to try and stabilize what they're working on?
Yes, so in this scenario, the idea is that, they will do the smaller areas where, and during the months where historically we have not had many high rain events, high water level events. And so then they will have enough stockpile stored there that should something pop up, and I'll show you the watershed of where they're going to be monitoring. Should something pop up, they'll have material to cover during that time. But in non-excavation seasons, all of the waste will be covered back up in a similar fashion to how it is now.
So they're gonna do this over 7 years. What about this new bridge they're gonna put in there?
Right? Yeah.
How do they coordinate these two disasters?
Right. So we've been asking for a very long time for the EPA to coordinate with TxDOT, and it wasn't until our CAC, Community Advisory Committee meeting we had with EPA this year that TxDOT participated. And through their participation, it was very clear to us that they have not been as strongly engaged as we were led to believe.
They do their own thing.
So it's not been enough interagency coordination as of yet. But it's not to say that it won't be, but there are specific sections with consideration to TxDOT with the bridge replacement and that overlap. But again, the shorter cleanup timeline most benefits the TxDOT effort. You would have 2 major construction efforts going on in one location. Okay, so let's talk about the excavation sections and decision units. And I have a fun little video because this is kind of crazy, and I was trying to wrap my head around how I could explain this to other people. And so let's start here with the decision units. So outline, we have all of the area that will be excavated. Each color, difference in color, signifies the different sections. This one, if I'm recalling correct, was around 15 or 18,000 cubic yards. The rest of them are in the 50,000 cubic yard range. So where they're starting, it will be the lowest volume of waste material removed, and then most of these are around 50, 55,000 cubic yards to be removed. Okay? Each of these are broken into half-acre sections. So this is a half acre, this is a half acre, and so on. Those are called decision units. Each of those half acres will be sampled to see if they have cleaned up the site to the EPA's standards. Now, over the years, there has been talk about cleaning up to an average of the cleanup standard of 30 parts per trillion. We've continued to push and say, no, the record of decision that the EPA signed is not an average. It is a point-by-point basis based on a risk scenario. So, where we are now is that some of the testing does not state all of the contaminants for concern. So each of those areas within the decision unit will be tested according to the responsible parties plans for dioxin and furans. But the contaminants of concern outlined for this site to be cleaned up are dioxins, furans, PCBs, and mercury. Now there's this notion that PCB will be located where dioxin is, which is true. But PCBs above 50 parts per trillion are a hazardous substance, no argument. It's a listed hazardous substance, no argument. The responsible parties have successfully gotten the EPA to agree that the dioxin does not classify as hazardous. So, now all of a sudden, they're saying they only need to test for dioxin and furans to make sure they clean the site up. Well, the landfill it's going to, I mean, okay, I won't speculate. The landfill it's going to probably wouldn't be happy to learn it might get PCBs above the threshold to then deem it hazardous waste. So I inquired with the EPA, I got a response from Robert today, and he brought up the co-location argument. The PCBs are going to be where the dioxin is. Great, you're getting it out of there, but at what level? At what level are you considering sending it to a Class 2 non-hazardous landfill, which is a municipal landfill? So some of the contradictions is that the quality assurance plan in this report says that the remedial contractor is going to determine the extent of testing. I don't think that's okay. The remedial contractor, it should be left up to them the extent of this testing. It needs to be solidified. The EPA needs to approve and be okay with exactly what's going to happen, particularly with how they're going to confirm they're getting the waste material out of there. So then I've already gone over this part right here. But we do have some retired EPA folks that we consult with. And a lot of what I'm saying here and a lot of the positions we take are supported by the people that we consult with who are field experts. And they agree. All of the contaminants and concerns should be tested for and all of the type of testing that's done. And you should not do any type of averaging. Every location needs a point-by-point test. So, let's think about some popcorn here. That's the sediment. Then you throw in maybe some dioxin. Okay, keep that in mind. You mix it in the bowl. There's maybe a couple granules of dioxin and then some sediment. Here's the mixing game that they're coming up with for what you call composite sampling. It's common, it's a common type of sampling. Okay, first step. Each decision unit is represented here. Let me go back. Each cup represents one of these 9 dots, okay, in this half-acre decision unit. 6 ounces of sediment will be taken from each of those dots. Each 6-ounce sample will be mixed in a metal bowl to become homogeneous, or to become one. Dioxin is still a particle though. Then it will be broken out into a 4-ounce sample and a 2-ounce sample. The 4-ounce samples will be sent to the lab, but they'll be stored. They're not being sent to the lab specifically to be analyzed, they're going to be stored in the event they're needed. So the 2 ounces from all 9 decision units in the half-acre go into one 18-ounce sample. And that's mixed, again in a metal bowl. And then they take 4 ounces of that, and that's what's actually tested to know if they cleaned it up or not. It's overwhelming, and it's
The EPA has agreed to this?
no. This is what is proposed in the design document, or this is what they say is going to be done in their design. The EPA hasn't agreed yet. So, if they just proposed this and said, okay, we're going to take these and send them to the lab, that would give the EPA a very granular look at that half-acre. Right, they're looking at 9 points within a half-acre and analyzing what's in that sample. But they're playing this Mickey Mouse game. Yes, Lisa?
So for the 9 samples that they take, would they also depth average? Because you're looking at this, in some cases, the worst contamination is going to be 10 feet down, but the surface might be clean.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's the solution to dilute, that's using dilution as a solution.
Right. Only out of all of this, winding up with 4 ounces actually being tested. Also, if this were, so let's just say, the retired EPA folks tell me that they see this all the time with yard sampling, which I believe is what was done for the yards that were tested for this site. You go to someone's yard, you test to see if the contaminants are there from the site, and you take 10 samples. 9 of them are clean, so they're 0 for what you're looking for. And 1 is 99, which is way above your limit. But then you combine them, and you run them, and you wind up with 9.9, which is below the threshold. But if someone were exposed at that location that the 99 came from, that's a hazard. That's not safe. So this doesn't work. This doesn't work for what our goal is. All right. Promise, we're going to leave here happy tonight. It's a lot, and that's why I say this is probably the toughest PowerPoint I've ever made to present to y'all. Okay, so the major threats that I wanted to point out and go into a little more detail that they have reports on and studies on in this document. First, hydraulic heave. Second is going to be the threats from barges, and then the third, water. A variety of things to deal with the water, so we're just water. Okay, so for hydraulic heave, they have identified the areas that they say, according to, all of their metrics and all of their computations, that are most at risk for hydraulic heave. Now, why I'm not, at this moment, totally against starting in that northwest corner is the difference in the pressure from underground and the aquifer, from that raising up once that waste, once the pressure is removed from the material that's there. Once that's removed, there are certain areas where the ground beneath it and the water beneath it have a force that's measurable, it's computable, that is pushing up. And that risks pushing up and destabilizing some or all or an area, whatever, of that site, destabilizing some of that site. So it could happen, maybe within, could happen on an edge, but it could wind up in a very bad situation. And so this hydraulic heave has been studied and studied, and so maybe why they're starting here is because they need the waste still to be around over here to keep that pressure to offset the uplift. So because of that, I'm not forming an opinion on the hydraulic heave issue or starting in the northwest corner. That's a situation where I believe we need more information on because we want this to be done as safe as possible. Nobody wants an accident to happen for the workers or for the river. But there is an in-depth item here. I'll be very curious to see, what Harris County and others come up with in their comments. And I know some entities have hired their own firms to look at this because all of this, again, is a computation. And, sometimes pictures can be painted a certain way. Okay, so with regards to the threat from barges, one of the big issues with the last design that was submitted was that despite the companies being told that they need to design some sort of bumper system around that cofferdam or the BMP wall for barges, they didn't. They didn't plan for that. So this line here is the bumper system. And it's called a fiberglass reinforced polymer. And that's what they're proposing to use to mitigate the barges, or a risk for a barge striking that BMP. Okay, so the wall is going to be 20 to 25 feet from the BMP. So it doesn't look, so that's about 20 to 25 feet out. It's rated for a 30,000 barrel barge, which is also what these dolphins are rated for. So it's an 18-inch diameter, the reinforced polymer, composite piles spaced 8 feet apart, and then there are 4 rows of 12-inch by 12-inch reinforced high-density polyethylene whalers to be installed horizontally on the exterior of piles. So the structure will look different, but weighted to withstand the same strike. Well, we all know how that worked out.
Yeah.
Okay, so here to give you, I know some of you are very interested in these types of structural things. So I was telling my team, I wouldn't give a presentation like this just to any community. A lot of you have been in this for many years and have engineered careers and brains. And so here we have exactly what was being talked about. And so the top of this polymer is going to be plus 12. So it's going to be 12 feet high vertically. Whereas the top elevation of that BMP, 20 to 25 feet out, is 10 feet. Okay, now we're going to talk about water. So I mentioned the area that is being looked at. So in terms of monitoring floods, the Gulf of Mexico will be monitored, and there's lists in these documents, in the design documents, of all of the flood gauges and all of the local governments that will be coordinated with and gauges and things monitored for high water events or increases, so that they can know if something's going on up here. And this is the Lake Houston watershed. Something's going on in the Lake Houston watershed, they're already starting to become aware of it and preparing for what might be a high water event down here on the San Jacinto River. They'll also be monitoring in through the ship channel. Okay, so this is showing you, these dots are all flooding events throughout really the history of monitoring water in this area. And so here are the months: January, February, March, April. You see April, you start having some, this is 8 feet. Let me double check. No, I'm sorry, that's 5. This is 5 feet, this is 8 feet, and this is 9. So in all of the history of the high water events, only 5 events were above 9 feet. And that's their justification of using a 10-foot BMP. Harvey, though, was plus 14 feet. Imelda was over 8. In this letter, I do bring this up because, you know, I think we need more of an explanation on how that can be justified.
Where did they get the 14.2 feet for Harvey?
The piezometers, I think they are, on site, the monitors on site, but also the gauges that they monitor, which is usually Sheldon and 146.
I think that's about 4 feet low.
Well, this right here, I've been trying to wrap my head around this. Does anyone know what this is? Okay, so it's not mean sea level. So it's not 14.28 above mean sea level. It's a computation. And so it's based on multiple different elevations. So I can't understand, I don't understand it enough to be able to explain it any better than that. Other than it's not mean sea level. It is something that is worldwide used for navigation and understanding our waterways that are tidally influenced. Yes?
One of the issues we have is, despite the flooding, which we know goes over I-10 and way out, we don't have flood gauges in our area. So it's all, no matter what number you put up there, it is a guess. There is no accurate data to verify those numbers. It's a guess. In my opinion, I'm not an engineer or anything like that, but without a gauge in this area, and why there's not a gauge in this area, with I-10 being the most heavily traveled commerce route in the United States, why they would not monitor right at it or very near it.
So they did finally, and yeah, that's something that we've raised, together for years. As the cross section at Sheldon is vastly different than right there where it narrows under I-10. So why aren't you looking there? And so they do have 2 monitors at the waste pits now. I don't know that they did at Harvey, but they do. We were successful at getting them to add them. I don't have access to that data. When I've asked, I don't get it. It's not something that's readily available for the public, and when I've asked the EPA directly, they've not given it to me. But they do have some data of their own there at the site. So also though, with the idea of that excavation taking place from here in November through wrapping around here to April. So, they're rolling their dice that in 7 years, through these historical months, there will be low flood probabilities. Yes?
Where is 94 on?
94.
94 flood.
It's one of these. It is one of these up here.
It was October 20th.
October 20th, okay. I remember reading it.
That's
They
when
do talk
fire
about it.
was.
Yeah. So then that would be this one.
Yeah, that probably is.
And this is the 10-foot line here. Okay, so they will have a designated high water preparedness person who is working on this effort. They will, every day, they'll be monitoring the weather, they'll be monitoring all of the flood gauges listed in that map I showed you with the Lake Houston area, and all of the local ones for the lower San Jacinto portion. As I mentioned earlier to Anna's question, materials stored on site to cover should they need to, and let's see, some of this I've already covered. Again, I just do want to note on the 6 inches that if it rises 6 inches within 1 to 2 hours, that 730,000 square foot area will be filled with water. So they also looked at wind, the effects of wind on the BMP, scour, both internally and externally, large impact, and earthquakes. And so one thing that really stuck out to me that I wanted to bring to your attention, they looked at wave action and the effects of that on the BMP. And they looked at different flooding scenarios. But I want to know if you agree with this statement, and I'll read it to you. Similar to the wind waves, wake waves should also be combined with the normal water levels in the area, 2 feet, 5 feet in elevation. Wind waves are not combined with wake waves since passing vessels overlapping with a storm event is unlikely. Don't you know that you see barges and tugboats in the area when there are storms? Flood scenarios, there's still vessels there, right?
Should we send them
Yeah, but they're
pictures
not
of
going
the
in and out.
barges on the bridge and on the impound itself?
Yeah.
I mean, should we send them and say,
Just a reminder. They have them, they know. But when I read this, I went, wait a minute. I think that this is ignoring a clear risk that should be evaluated as such. Okay, so for transportation and disposal, I mentioned and showed you the area where that ramp will go on. The truck type, according to this report, is to be determined by the remedial contractor. And the beds would be lined with a 4 mil liner, and then the truck would also be covered. I know that's something y'all have asked about historically. And then all of the trucks will pass through the cleaning and the inspection zone before entering the roadways. Also, the disposal locations are not determined at this time. They are looking at multiple locations between 60 and 120 miles from here. So they're estimating even if they select somewhere 120 miles away, that a truck driver would be able to do a 2-turn day. They would come pick up 2 loads in one day. Yes, Anna?
Question about that. The truck drivers will wash out their trucks. Is that only going to be done at the disposal site? Because that doesn't really make sense. If it's their last load for the day, they're not going back there to wash out the truck. So has that been discussed?
So what I read about that is that they will be washed before they leave the site. And then another thing I read, that this was the first time I've seen this, was that the construction equipment, because we all remember, you know, the time they went over to Four Corners side and took the hose and washed off the Bobcat after it left the site. So I saw that all the construction equipment as well will be washed. But no, I didn't see anything about that.
Because after, when they dump it at the landfill, it's got the possibility of recontaminating the equipment, so I think that's a
And the
question.
person.
Is it gonna be
Sure.
washed and cleaned from the landfill?
So I think the idea is that it will be confined in a plastic liner.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, or they're going to wash their truck out at some point.
Yeah,
And if it's, they're not going to do it at the disposal site. If they went 60 miles away, where are they going to do it?
yeah.
And are the truck drivers aware that they shouldn't come in contact with any of it?
I'm just thinking about that plastic liner, what if it's ruptured when they're dumping it?
Yeah, that's a very valid point as well. Things to be considered. So these reports still left a lot to be desired. Like, aren't these things that should be discussed and worked through and understood? Yeah, there's a lot, you know. Also a lot that they're continuing to say is left up to the remedial contractor, like the selection of the trucks. You know, I think that they should be cleaner trucks. You know, that's a lot of trucks coming in this community. The newer trucks have better emissions. We know that.
I don't know if this is feasible. Can we get a sample of 6 mil plastic and see how hard it is to rupture it?
A legal pad, a piece of paper off a legal pad is 3 mils. So it's
Okay.
twice the thickness of a legal pad, 6 mils.
So dragging it out of a truck bed was no problem whatsoever. If it's that clean.
Yeah, I wonder,
Can we do a video demonstration? to them? Our concern is a Ziploc bag is sturdier.
Well, Ziploc bag is not 4 mils, but I think it's a question to raise.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a question we can really fully answer here at this point. I think a lot of what we're doing is identifying questions that the EPA should be answering, and then holding their some level of accountability to getting those answers.
yeah, this will be the lengthiest comment we've ever written to them, and rightfully so, right? I mean, this is about the construction and the way that this all happens, and it's critical. They can't leave anything up in the air, and especially not, I mean, there's a deep vein of distrust, you know, with things that we have observed at this site, actions that have been taken in this process, and the community needs to have confidence that this is being done correctly. Okay, we still have the sand separation area to go over. Okay, so again, the sand separation area is this area over here that has a different selected remedy in that record of decision. The southern site had its own remedy selection, the northern pit has its, and the sand separation area has its own plan. So the record of decision for this red area, the sand separation area, that was selected is monitoring and natural recovery. Now, that's because the area has lower levels of dioxin, and most of the area is depositional. To me, it seems like a lot less problematic and easier just to get it out of there. And, you know, we'll definitely continue to raise our concerns on this area. But the area is owned, actually. This area within the sand separation area, even though it's adjacent to this business here, this bottom here is owned by the Port of Houston Authority. And that's something that I don't see in a lot of these documents. So I thought it was interesting that that was mentioned. There's currently a barge here across a portion of that site. Now, the language in the design for the sand separation area is incredibly inconsistent. It is one of those highlighted areas where I'm in binder 2, thinking, did someone different write this than who wrote the plan and part of the plan in binder 1, and so on throughout all of the material. Very inconsistent. In one area, it says that the record of decision didn't establish a cleanup goal. Well, in fact, yes, it did. And then in another one of the reports that they have in this big package, it says that it did. And so, terribly inconsistent. And again, urging the EPA in this letter not to ignore the rod. Because someone picks up one of those monitoring and natural recovery sections for this, they might go, oh, EPA didn't have a cleanup goal. And if they pick up another one, they might go, oh, EPA did have a cleanup goal. So we need consistency and we need to stick to the record of decision with the cleanup goal. So let me see, let me go back to this though. The area that has the highest levels of dioxin is right here. And in the studies they did, where they did isotope dating, where they could tell if the area was being eroded or if it was being deposited, you know, getting more sand on top of it, burying it essentially, they saw that this area right here is being eroded. And then all the tests they took in these other cells that this was divided into showed that it was gaining sediment, which still, in my opinion, doesn't mean much because we know the force of this river.
They're not going to do anything on the land?
No.
Megasand had a monstrous pile of sand there. They also had a conveyor system so they could load trucks. And it was just to the left of that. That whole little peninsula there was full of equipment when they were dredging.
I honestly don't think that I've ever seen any maps of testing on the land.
Oh, it was on the land. I mean,
yeah, no, I know that, but I don't know that they've ever tested the land, though.
Well, I don't know.
So
That's probably something they ought to check into, because that land over there might be pretty well contaminated. Because that's where all the sand was loaded onto trucks. They had to carry it out of there somehow.
We'll look and see. Go back to the sample locations and see if they've done any testing and discuss that with the EPA. That's a really interesting point. Really interesting. Yeah, so because they defined this, you know, red area here as the sand separation area. I'm not seeing anything beyond it towards the land. But this spot right here, right up against the land, is the hottest spot in terms of dioxin. It had over 3,000 parts per trillion. And the cleanup goal in the rod is 51.
That's consistent with what you just said.
Right, yeah. And so there's a lot of unknown beyond that. But yeah, right there where the land meets the water is the hot spot. But they're still not budging.
If they go in 50 to 100 feet into that thing and take a couple of soil samples out, they should probably do that. Just because I don't know if it'd be on Google Earth or something and it shows pictures, you know, satellite pictures of all that equipment there, but they had monstrous piles of sand there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the design continues, and the EPA has as well continued to say, oh, MNR was the selected remedy here. Yeah, but when you know better, do better. And we know better. And just like at the northern pit, and just like at the southern pit, both of those vastly had an expansion of the area contaminated and the amount of waste material to be removed. So I don't agree with them continuing to hang their hat on the idea that, oh, but the remedy was selected because this was the understanding. It's very common in the Superfund process, and it's happened at this site.
Well, where did the EPA think all that contamination came from if it didn't come from all the equipment that was on the ground?
No, they know that it came from there. Yeah, we know it came from there.
Well, actually, Howard said last year in the June meeting, they don't want to look for it anymore. They're only going to address what they found. That's why they're not following the area of concerns rules and regulations.
So the plan is to test this area at the start of the remedial action and see, is it still being deposited on? Is there still diox in there? And then to test again when they conclude the remedial action or the cleanup at that northern pit, which they're estimating would be 2030, which doesn't make sense on their own timeline. Then they would test a year after. There's a timeline of when they would test, but they basically give us the argument that they're not willing to change it until the 5-year review, which is still potentially, which is over a decade away. It could be gone by then, downstream, upstream. So, what's next? If you agree with the points in the letter, please sign it. I had too much to say to put it in a simple petition. So I also wanted you to have the space if you wanted to write something. If you have comments or things that you want to follow up and let me know you think are important to be pointed out to the agency, I'll be happy to advocate on your behalf and let them know about the concerns and try to get a response for you. So we'll be submitting our technical comments by the deadline, which is August 30th. And then also, we should have an update on the cancer study in the near future. But in closing, I would say that all of your involvement over the years has dramatically impacted this process, and I know it can be a bit defeating, taking the wind out of your sail at times, because there's still so much more work that needs to be done and so much more room to go. But it is making progress, and now it's up to the EPA, to really hold the companies accountable. And are they going to be okay with this, or are they going to take over? And that's really the big decision we're waiting on. Thank you all for being here. We have a little bit of time. We do need to be out of here in just under 20 minutes, but I'm happy to answer any questions, hear your concerns, before we wrap up. Well, this has been very productive. I'm thankful for all the feedback that you've given us and for y'all being here. Thank you.
Thank you.